Episode 8, welcome. Episode 8, Afrolantican Jurisprudence. Extraordinary commitment to equal protection of law through 6,000 years of African statehood and political organization. And today's topic, we're going to talk about the Harem conspiracies and due process of law in the Nile Valley. Basically, we're going to talk about law enforcement. The first 6 or 7 episodes, we talked about the origins of law in the Nile Valley, its matrilineality, its matriarchy. And we even talked about some due process issues. We talked about some equal protection issues. But we didn't talk about, this leads us into a discussion more specifically about law in action. We talked about the theoretical bases for property succession, the theoretical bases for power succession, and then we talked about the principles of Mott, real ethereal stuff that overgirds the whole system. So now we're getting further and further into the more specific history of the Nile Valley in Africa and applying those precepts to, or seeing whether and if and how those precepts were applied to actual legal action in those days, and whether it relates to I guess good times, or whether it helped us propel ourselves to greatness, to empire, and whether the being inconsistent with the concept of Mott led to perhaps our downfall. Are these things that we could take from periods in the past and use them towards a philosophy for going forward? Because again, we're not, the ultimate idea or the ultimate goal is not for just a black system, it is for the better system. We're looking for through the past to find out what we might have missed, what we're not taught, and see if we can extract some things that are useful towards going towards the future. If anybody here is, or reading, watching, is an Octavia Butler fan, I encourage you to read all of Octavia Butler's stuff. I think she's on par with the Toni Morrisons, etc. And particularly a book called Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, and where she describes the beginnings of what she calls an earth seed community. I don't want to go into the details of the book. Just know that it's an awesome, awesome book written in the 90s by a fantastic author. But what Afrolantican Jurisprudence has to do with that book is its relation to Earthseed, right? The idea that it is possible, and who knows if it's likely or probable, but it is possible that at a certain point we may have to start from scratch, that there can be that there could be a period of time, either socially or politically, where we see that this system either does fail, or we choose somewhere else or choose another system. And the question becomes, what is it? What is the new system? What is the better system? We're not trying to leave one system to go to something worse, right? And we're not going to just assume that anything is better. Could be, I don't know, but I'd rather be pretty more sure about that. I'd rather spend our time now trying to construct what we think would be a better system for an earth seed, for Afrolantica, all of these mythical places where we imagine a better society. Okay, so with that said, again, we've talked about matrilineality and matriarchy, the tale of the eloquent peasant as far as equal protection in class, the instructions of the vizier Ptahhotep, again, as far as administering justice. And so it all comes together here when we talk about more specific law enforcement activities in the Nile Valley, and particularly Upper Egypt, and even more particularly the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and the new, in parts of the New Kingdom. And we see, as usual, that when we get to the New Kingdom, as it declines, we see the cultural unity and the adherence to African cultural principles such as Mott declining along with it. And so you wonder if the devolution of the society leads to the inconsistency with morals in Mott, or whether it's the inconsistencies of morals in Mott that lead to the downfall of society. Again, it's very interesting stuff. I'm still always a student of this game, and we keep searching for more and more and more answers, which actually gives us more and more questions. So let's talk. Let's just dive right in. I don't get into too much of the intro because there is so much to talk about. But let's start with talking about due process. I know we're going to get to the harem conspiracies, and that's such a juicy title. I know you probably want me to talk about the harem conspiracies immediately, but we're going to put that off for a second. Just know that the harem is not having anything to do with sex. I'm sorry if that steals away some of the I don't know, salaciousness of the topic, but it doesn't have anything to do with sex. The harem is a convent, right? And actually is a well-established convent and wealthy, owns a lot of land. And it is well connected basically with the king or the pharaoh, and sometimes on equal par with the pharaoh, and perhaps even greater in certain times. And it would seem that in the 20th dynasty, after the New Kingdom, in the fall of the New Kingdom, that the southern provinces, the southern part of the empire, felt that it was being more or less subjugated or wanted to detach from the northern part, Lower Egypt, the Delta, the Mediterranean, wanted to distance itself from them, and basically set upon a conspiracy to assassinate Ramesses III, a conspiracy between one of Ramesses III's wives, one of the god's wives of Ammon, named T, and in conjunction, again, we know they come up from the south again, one of the generals of the Nubian, of the army, who was Nubian. And we're going to talk about, it's going to make even more sense after we talk about this other stuff to begin with, and it culminates all into that. And you'll see how interesting it is that Queen T and the general of the Nubian army are the ones that are, and several, over 30 people, lots of officials, men and women, are actually tried for this conspiracy and most put to death. So we have to wait for the 25th dynasty for the reunification of Egypt, led by the African interior. All right, so due process, right? We're talking about harem conspiracies and due process in the Nile Valley. So let's define, or at least describe, what due process means, at least in American law. I don't know where you're watching at, but we're going to compare a lot of this to the law that's in the United States of America. And in our Constitution, there is the 5th and the 13th Amendment. The 5th and 13th Amendment, part of it, says that you cannot deprive, the government cannot deprive someone of their life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Now, flip that, and it means we can take your life, we can take your liberty, we can take your property, so long as we give you a process of law that the courts find is due, that they consider due, or that they consider what? Fair. Two components have been created within, again, American jurisprudence. What does it mean to have a fair hearing or a fair process? And it breaks down into two components in American jurisprudence: notice and opportunity to be heard. Notice, right, of the crimes, of the law, that you think that I broke it, right? That I am answering for a particular charge, that I am able to prepare. I'm able to know what's going on to try to keep myself out of trouble to begin with. And even what the specific charges are once they are, and how to defend myself, what I'm defending myself from. So that's notice in a nutshell. There's also the much larger construct of the opportunity to be heard, right? A hearing, right? That is huge, because a hearing could take all types of shapes and forms. And not only that, it also relates very much to the technology and the wealth that you have in your society, right? Because on the one hand, we want decisions made over important things like crime, like torts, like anything else, your rights, any hearing over your rights, we'd like it to be accurate. However, it can't go on forever. And we also don't have the unlimited resources. So to put this in the context, think of a death row inmate. Yes, they have a right to a lawyer. Yes, there is a heightened sense of scrutiny and justice and appeals process for capital murder cases. However, does this lawyer, for just one example, have an unlimited budget? Million, 10 million, $40 million to uncover the truth, to hire as many private investigators as humanly possible, because I just know for a fact this person didn't do it? No, there's going to have to be some rules or some limitations based on the society's wherewithal, and that still be considered relatively fair, right? So with that in mind, that's how we're going to look back on 4, 5, 6,000 years ago on, number one, this idea that society's ability to take life, liberty, and property from folks, and what process of law are they using to do so? In other words, what notice did those people have of the laws above them, or that they were subject to? And what opportunities to be heard did we afford them as far after being accused of a crime or a tort or something else, right? And the best thing about, well, not the best, but let's start off with, again, with the idea that justice and law is just is so important in the Nile Valley, so important in ancient Kemet and also Nubia, because we know that Commission law, Commission culture basically derives from Nubian culture, then goes back to Nubian culture after the fall of Egypt. But we know that it's always been a very, 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 very serious matter. Why? Because of one of the great gods, one of the highest ranking gods in the Egyptian stratosphere or cosmosphere sphere is Ma'at, right? Truth, justice, balance, order, and that her male counterpart Thoth judges those who are in the underworld, that the soul, the Ka, that makes it to the underworld and compares it, weighs it against Ma'at's feather to see if you make it. More than just a trial over the goodness or righteousness of your soul, it requires testimony. You, the individual that is being tried, you must recite the negative confessions, the things that you were instructed not to do, or you knew not to do, and that you didn't do them, that you followed the law. That's a huge statement in some circles when you say followed the law, because as I mentioned several episodes again, there are what we call hyper-positivist scholars, and they're usually of a more Eurocentric ilk, that require the finding of a particular writing to prove that you had law. The fact that you had a community of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people operating in an orderly succession with courts and all that, for some reason, suggests to some people that there wasn't law itself. I don't know what they think replaced it, but that they think, again, that the pharaohs were just complete gods, ruled thousands of miles of territory with just an edict from themselves to govern. I just don't know how that works if we don't have a regulatory process. And I think most people are coming around to that understanding. I think as time is going on, I think we've collectively, for the most part, come to accept that Egypt had law, even if we can't find particular codes. And we can also extract certain laws from other sources. And I'll talk about that later. Again, when we talk about Ma'at, the negative confessions, etc., there's law in there. So to the extent it was ubiquitous, and it was, figures of Ma'at extend all the way from the Naqada period, the pre-dynastic period, all the way to when the Europeans and Asiatics take over. They still hold on to Ma'at. We still hold on to Ma'at, right, with the balance in the scales. So it's a serious matter, and it produces law as far as the negative confessions. We'll also talk about Harem head edicts. We'll talk about some other discussions of law from Diodorus and Siculus, some of the European scholars of Greece and Rome. But let's start, before we get there, to law in the streets. Right? How is law affecting your everyday life in Egypt? Right? Let's say you're not the pharaoh, you're not one of the high priests or priestess of Ammon and whatnot. You're just a farmer. you're just a employee, right? There's lots of employees and lots of different occupations. You're a trader, you live in town or you live in the country. How did law affect you? What was it like back then? Okay, so that requires us to understand a little about Egyptian life and understand first that we're going to start in the Old Kingdom and move 3,000 years hence. So we're not going to talk about, hesitating to talk about Bronze Age and Iron Age and all that you're going to read in a lot of history books. Let's suffice it to say that in the Old Kingdom, we're talking about having walled families, large families that can create a compound of agriculture in their farms, being able to build walls around that homestead to kind of protect it, and having a family unit within there. Again, headed by Big Mama. This is Big Mama's place. But then the men of the family would be protectors and what have you, while a lot of the women did the farming. Men also often did the weaving and did more more domestic activities. But as that grows, and as one compound grows or several compound grows, along the Nile River, we might create larger walls that encompass several families, numerous families, and numerous farms. If we can build a wall around these, we can establish gates to let people in and out. And these towns, in European lore or history, you're going to see them as castles. Same difference. Those places are more or less banks, to be in a sense. I'm analogizing them to banks in such that if you're outside of the wall with a large farm and you have a surplus, you might be able to store it in the granaries within this town. If you have a certain amount of wealth or goods, it may be safer to keep them with those or king or queen of the town, or mayor, governor, doesn't matter, of that town, right? When someone comes to attack, the people of the farmland all around come within the walls of that town, right? And having a series of towns such as this, all the way from Ethiopia down through Nubia, through Egypt, all the way to the Mediterranean, is what we're calling Nile Valley culture, right? And these towns also exist in 3000, 2000, 4000 AD in the Levant, in the Aegean, in Asia Minor, on the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, right? The so-called Middle East or Western Asia. Now their towns are not linked, or at least we don't believe so. Whereas the big thing about dynastic Egypt is the idea of all of these towns being separated into different nomarchs, and those nomarchs being separated between Lower and Upper Egypt, and then having one bureaucracy govern all of those towns, provinces, and nomes, and on top of it, extending that empire towards Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, all the way up to Greece, down through Lower Nubia, Upper Nubia, Ethiopia, and possibly all the way down to Kenya in the south, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about ancient Egypt and its systems. And we know that individuals, first of all, in the smallest set or cell, they resolve those family disputes amongst themselves, right? But what if two different families have issues as to who owns a certain amount of property, or where the dividing line is, especially when you have the Nile River. It overflows and it floods, and then it goes back again, the floods recede and it keeps on flowing. But it's not going to be this exact same shape it was before. So how do we, again, demarcate each other's land so that when it comes back, I know this is mine versus this is yours? Egyptians created geometry, mathematics, as a way to basically identify whose land is whose, to regulate private real property. But those disputes, to the extent we're going to have them, we could have disputes about marriage and divorce, right? Not just the marriage, but the divorce, right? If we break apart, whose property is what property goes to what family versus another family. There's also there's oftentimes disputes between agriculturalists and pastoralists. In other words, I own a farm, you own a bunch of cattle. Your cattle just trampled over my farm. That's a problem. I can't eat. Don't you owe me? So those questions had to be resolved if they couldn't be resolved individually. And we also don't just want the mightiest to make the rules and trample over those without power. So this idea of courts of law that can string together all these towns and have them operate in a consistent way so that the empire can enrich itself through trading agriculture and cattle and vases and gold and sequins and turquoise and copper and all these goods that are from all these different places. If we can have this regularized legal world, we can have transactions between us that enrich everybody. That's the idea, at least, right? And again, we can look at things like The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant, about how sometimes it's very hard to distinguish between tort law and criminal law. In America, we distinguish between these two types of law, and we, as the funny thing is, we think that's an indication of modernity, right? That Egyptian law is not as modern as ours because they don't have these divisions of law, whatever. And so, because at that time, number one, we have to also deal with the wherewithal. How much wealth, how much experience do you have? And we know from Aristotle that these legal concepts predate dynastic Egypt. But we very quickly find out that Egyptians were very concerned about judging and impartiality. We spent a great amount of time 3 episodes ago talking about the tale of the eloquent peasant. And if you notice, it's not very clear there whether his donkey's trampling, Kunanu, right, that's our subject, that's the eloquent peasant, whether his donkey and his goods, when they trampled over Nemteknak's cape and his goods and his easement on his property, we're not clear whether that's a tort, in other words, just a property crime between us, a property assault between us where you just owe me money and it's between me and you, versus I trampled over your rights in contempt of the state, right? Meaning a criminal law, that my punishment comes from the state because of an offense that harms the state, not you as an individual. Yes, I hurt you, but the crime to the state is disorder, and the state versus Johnson, the state versus Smith versus Johnson, between two people, right? So we're talking about public affairs versus private affairs. Now, again, as private affairs, we tried to use our own walls, windows. Yeah. One thing, again, I love about the study of law in ancient Egypt is not just for law itself, is to bring the entire civilization into focus and show that it wasn't that much foreign from what we experience today. And again, houses with windows and whatnot. This is 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And what did you do to keep that protection? A gun? You don't have a gun, but what do you have? Dogs. Yes, we kept dogs to protect our property when you had a very successful farm and compound to house your family. It even said, a barking domestic dog is the one who causes his master to be safe. That's from ancient Egypt. So we don't yet, though, have a great amount of police force, right? We have individuals protecting themselves at the beginning, but it doesn't take very long for there to be a standing force for each, let's say, town, and then for the nation. Let's start with the idea that, again, the settlement where I have walls around my house and I have a dog to protect me. Again, we grow in stature, we grow as a community, and now we have a greater wall that spreads, let's say, hundreds of meters, if not thousands of meters, and maybe even miles around. And they're there to protect us. We're going to have gatekeepers, right? Some people that are either going to take turns as gatekeepers, or maybe they are dedicated entirely as gatekeepers, where I don't farm anymore. I don't produce, or I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not a blacksmith. I'm not a vase maker. I'm not a cloth weaver. I protect the city, right? I stand by the gates. Thebes, the capital of Upper Egypt, right, that we talk about so much when we talk about Upper Egypt. We're going to talk about Thebes or Waset. It was called the city of the thousand, either 100 gates or 1,000 gates. I'm just going to say 100. The city of 100 gates. So that gives you a sense of how large the city's walls were around it to protect the people. The city of 100 gates, where Thebes in Athens is the city of 7 gates. Let me repeat that again. Thebes is the city of 100 gates. Thebes in Africa, Thebes in Upper Egypt, that which is closest to Nubia, the area we're focusing most on when we're talking African cultural unity. We're talking about 2000 BC. We're talking about this. It's called by the Greeks as the city with the 100 gates, whereas Thebes in Greece is the city with the 7 gates. All right. So we have these 100 gates to protect. So we're going to have gatekeepers, and those gatekeepers are very quickly going to turn into basically a police force. Right. And from a police force, if I can gather many different cities, again, that's the whole point of Narmer and these dynasties marching up from the south, conquering Lower Egypt, attaching them as one big polity, is that I'm going to use these armies, or I'm sorry, these several police forces, or these folks, not directly, but the people that otherwise would be police, we can form them into more or less armies, right? They've already been freed up from agricultural production. So what we're going to do with them, use that we go from gatekeepers to police to full standing armies. These armies could be at the behest of private citizens. They could be at the behest of the black church, the Church of Ammon or Osiris, or someone else, or Ra. But most often, again, the point of a dynasty and this idea of the greatness of the state of Egypt is that the state had its army that was preeminent, right? That it had its army and it was preeminent. And what was its major role to begin with? Taxes. Taxes. So whether they're a soldier or a policeman, their initial role is to protect government officials as they go out and collect taxes. You imagine, people aren't happy about paying taxes. You give it a certain legitimacy by the Queen Mother and her regalness, dripping with gold, and that's the purpose of, again, these expeditions where the pharaoh, the king, the queen toured the entire land each year. That was their obligation. Whether they did it or not is another thing. But they toured the land and impressed everybody with their wealth and the singers and the might and the greatness of Egypt. But what they're doing also is taking your stuff from your community, pieces of it. That's part of the taxation or trade, right? By coming through your land through these expeditions, we are basically celebrating and subjugating at the same time. If you don't like what we're doing, it's going to be a problem. Hopefully you're going to come out and cheer, and we're all going to have a good time. And not only that, if I'm a good king, if I'm a good queen, what am I doing? I'm returning the favors back to you. You're giving me cotton, you're giving me metal vases, you're giving me wheat, you're giving me corn, okay, or I'm taking it either way, and I'm returning to you all the stuff from the other parts of the kingdom that you don't have, right? And of course, there are going to be people in that area that are going to be lining up to be first in line, so that's how I'm going to control those folks that are going to then tax their people and give it unto me. So again, the first duty of these police and these armies and whatnot are to protect the tax collectors, right? And we know that, again, when we move up to the New Kingdom, we're going to be collecting these taxes all the way from Greece all the way down to Kenya. And not only that, if we understand that about the touring, right, that expeditions and tours by the monarch in the regions is one of the reasons why when the empire is so big, we're going to have viziers, a vizier for the north, a vizier for the south, a region for the south, and a region for the north that they must respect, so that when they go on these tours to collect taxes, it can be as efficient as possible. We you prefer, every state would prefer their taxes paid more voluntarily than by force. And then there's techniques to that. Now, more than just going about and taxing people for their property, how are we getting there? Uh, we're using our tax money that we create when we get this corn and barley and extra stuff. We're going to do public works projects. We're going to pay it back out. I can't eat all that stuff. The ruling class can't eat all that we're taking. What are we doing with it? A good ruler is using it to create public works projects that then further unite the country. So again, the Sphinx, the pyramids, the temples and whatnot. We're taking food and we're storing them in granaries. We're taking all this other good stuff and we're paying it back out to the people that work on this stuff. And usually, again, when it comes to the Nile Valley, even farmers, there's certain parts of the year where because the Nile is flooded, you can't farm. So hopefully you have enough to eat during that time. But if you do or if you don't, if there's a public works project building a temple that needs stonemasons, craftsmen, bricklayers, etc., that was a means to also supplement, either have a primary or a supplemental income. So this is all how a nation is being built, right? That's how it's growing, and how legal protection is needed for this to go further. So on top of just collecting taxes so that we can provide for all this, another public works project we have are roads. It's very interesting how underappreciated roads are. Roads and the maintenance of roads. You hate it when you hit a pothole and if it flattens your tire. Well, think about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years. How do you get around? Where are the roads? Who builds the roads? Again, that's for the greatness of the empire depends on the ability to tax, create public works, including roads, and then once you have those roads, protecting the people that are on them. So when we talk about law enforcement in ancient Egypt, we see, again, this idea of police growing from gatekeepers to a general police force, to an army, a national army, to even responsibilities to guard the roads, to then also guard the borders, to decide who gets in and who is able to leave. It's interesting because this police force also becomes sort of the post office, because you rule the roads, because you have access to them, because we have terminal points one to the next and next and next and next. If I need to send a message, if I'm the Pharaoh and I need to send a message from Thebes all the way to Canaan, or from Thebes down to Napata or Meroe, I would, instead of creating the post office just yet, we're going to give it to the police force or the army. Here's an interesting thing. The army and the police force in Egypt and Kemet was primarily Nubian. Let me say that again. The army and the police force in ancient Egypt, particularly during the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom, the areas towards its greatness, the areas of the time periods of its greatest dynasticism, and especially in the New Kingdom, its existence as empire, Nubians were the major component of the armies and the police forces. It was a middle-class occupation, so the idea that Nubians were slaves in Egypt is very false. There's an interesting quote. I wish I had it in front of me specifically, because it even suggests that women could be Nubian police officials. They were called the Medjay warriors. It could be Medjay, but I'm going to call them Medjay warriors. That was the name given to Nubians who served in the armed forces or as police. And it seemed that sometimes that women were also described as the Medjay. Now, some people say that the Medjay could just stand for Nubians generally, but there's a lot of terms for Nubians generally, Nihisi and others. So when they say Medjay warriors, with the Medjay, I think it's fair to assume in most instances that they're talking about Nubian policemen and women and army personnel. This is a very serious matter. There's federal administrators that are known as the supervisor of the hundreds. There's also the chief of the Medjay warriors. So these are cabinet level positions, secretaries of the army, etc. Let me read you a quote regarding these Medjay warriors and their role in at least the New Kingdom. A mining party more than 9,000 men strong under Ramesses IV was accompanied by a unit of 50 policemen, and when there was somewhat of a security situation in Upper Egypt during the late New Kingdom, the authorities ordered police from the region to assemble in order to protect the Theban necropolis. They plundered everything. And burned its people, so they say. Now the high priest of Ammon said to us, "Bring the police of Per-Nebet together with those who are in the south and those of the necropolis, and let them stand there guarding the necropolis." Right. So again, this idea of mining parties of 9,000 men sent on an expedition to extract limestone or copper, gold. We're going to have a whole episode on copper. Copper is a really interesting metal in the ancient world. But 9,000 men strong under Ramesses IV, protected by policemen. Right? We're not just sending you out there on your own. We actually have a police force or army force, and they're typically Nubians. The Medjay controlled travelers wanting to leave or enter Egypt, interrogated them, and if they did not meet the necessary criteria, they were refused passage and captured if they were runaway slaves trying to flee the country, or turned back to the desert if they were foreigners, even when they were attempting to escape a famine where they had come from. And it's interesting because the first intermediate period after the 6th dynasty, one of the reasons it's argued that Egypt falls, that the lower Egypt and upper Egypt split apart, is again a famine. And once people aren't able to eat, right, we're less likely to feel a line from lower Egypt to upper Egypt. Now the dynasties continue as the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th dynasties, but that just means that they typically ruled only upper Egypt and perhaps down through Nubia. When it comes that lower Egypt had stopped paying its taxes, right? Perhaps they had their own police forces. The border police also reported on mail being sent abroad. There is a record dating to 15 of the first month of the 3rd season of the year 3 of the reign of Seti. So even way back, we're talking about the police as a mail force. Now, the police force is respected. They're respected members of the citizens. They don't seem to be considered a opposing force until after the New Kingdom. So once we get past Ramesses the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, that's when we see serious disputes between the South, Upper Egypt, and Lower Egypt, violent clashes between the two, as we mentioned before, conspiracies to assassinate one or the other. And we see that one of the reasons Upper Egypt is trying to secede is because the police force, which used to be Nubian, now has become an impressive part of society. Let me read you some of these. That when it gets to the New Kingdom, following the precepts of Mott is not in the interest of the government. Let me read you this part. In a possibly fictitious petition, a priest, PDEC, who lived under the Persian dynasty, described how he was arrested. "They seized me, my son, and 4 brothers of mine. They put us into instruments of torture. They incarcerated us in the courtyard of a temple. Pakop dismissed son of Itheriu. He had him bound with handcuffs. He ordered him to be thrown into the place where we were." Couple things interesting there. Again, we have the Persian dynasty and abuse, and the most clear abuse story of police abuse occurring when the Persians are now controlling Egypt, and the Africans are now being treated as just subjects who pay taxes, and those taxes basically leave the area and aren't used to create public works there. They are instruments of torture. So we have, even though we're going to praise the modernity of Egypt, we also need to recognize that there were elements of torture, and we'll talk about the corporal punishments that were levied in Egypt long ago. Other interesting things, he had him bound with handcuffs. That seems pretty modern, right? That they were going to thrown in the place where we were, right? A jail or a prison. Whether there were jails or prisons in Africa is a very heated topic. I know John Henry Clark, again, one of my intellectual grandfathers, of course, says that Africa did not know prisons or jails. However, I think some of the evidence might need to pull back on that claim just a little bit. Also note, they seized me, my son, and 4 brothers of mine. Now, those 4 brothers of mine could be compatriots, but we also might think of that more literally when we understand that, again, Africans were in lots of matrilineal societies. So that walled residence, that very successful walled residence of farm where they're noble, whatever, is, again, typically run by a queen mother. That's Big Mama's house. Right? Men may be chosen. There may be one man there who's considered the one that can lay down the rules and lay down the law and is the chief person who's protected, but it's still Big Mama's house, right? And oftentimes, again, they live amongst brothers, right? And later, there's going to be more marriage contracts where I leave the compound and I take wives and we establish our own family, but in the earliest times, you're going to see more of a family compound headed by Big Mama and the nephews, uncles, brothers, sons ruling in her stead. And that's extrapolated again to the rest of the state when it comes to Osiris, Isis, and Horus, to Amen, Mut, Kansu. Right, the man, woman, child trilogy is ubiquitous in Africa. Again, going back to this Persian dynasties and these Greek dynasties and how the police force either changes or the perception of them changed. One of the schemes for extorting money from the citizenry was to accept bail and then to refuse to release the prisoner. Having given bail to Sakamines, the warden, to release me in light of the circumstances, but Sakamines, after receiving 2 bail payments from me, is not acting in good faith. I am asking that if you agree, to the extent you take the matter in hand and bring it to a head, you not overlook me, who has wasted away 8 months and been disdained by. Wow. Bail, right? Again, a prisoner jail, and prisoner jails were, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but they weren't usually used to as the actual punishment. They were usually used to detain the person until trial. But we see here someone waiting 8 months for a trial. So this idea of requiring a speedy trial after I've been accused is an issue, right? We know that's an issue here. And that also this idea that I could post bail so that I could leave and go back to my compound and do my work in good faith, right, is something that was lacking in future times. We see more complaints about that in future times than we did in the past. Before we move forward to the actual court cases, note that this police force, we talked about individuals using dogs to guard their own compounds. We also know that, you know, domestication of cats, that Egyptians, that the police forces, they often use dogs and they often used monkeys. Right? So these Medjay warriors also, not only did they have large staffs, and they were authorized to whoop a little ass with them too, so know that. Not only were the Nubian Medjay warriors impaneled as police officers, mostly throughout Egypt, but certainly through Upper Egypt. They also used animals, trained dogs, to help them in their police practice. There were police dogs. There were also police monkeys, and there are hieroglyphics that depict monkeys holding on to prisoners, or I'm sorry, holding on to suspects while the policeman catches up to grab them and arrest them. So wildly interesting component of Nile Valley law enforcement are the Nubian Medjay warriors as police and their trained police dogs and police monkeys. So now that you're in court, you've been accused of a crime. What is the notice that I have, right? We talked about due process, this hearing that's fair. What notice might I have of the law, and how do I get out of a false accusation, right? So let's start about notice to begin with. The idea that I should know what the law is in order for you to accuse me of breaking it and then punishing me for it, right? So let's start with the idea that, again, ancient Egypt mythology and hieroglyphics, there's a contestation or there's a dispute as to whether or not judicial precedents serve as authority. And what do we mean by that? Again, is the judge in the case, and we'll talk about judges specifically later, but is the judge in the case able to make up the law as they might that day? Today I feel the law is this, or today I feel the law is that, because that's not notice, right? To just go up before someone and then they just decide to deal with you upon a whim. So, and then to deal with someone else differently tomorrow, right? So judicial precedence as authority, again, just as much as there's a dispute about whether there are legal codes, those that believe Egypt had a judicial precedent as authority use hieroglyphics to show court cases and mythical scenes where rolls of papyrus are on a table, clearly to be consulted by the judge. And even more than that, we have writings from Aristoteles that show that the instructions to the vizier are very precise. And who, again, is the vizier? Let's recall that there's the pharaoh or the king or queen at the top. Their principal, and they have the final word. They can act as a court as well. But that because, again, we have a large land with lots of people, we delegate this authority and primarily to the vizier, the prime minister, the chief justice. He wears a lot of different hats, but then as society moves forward and more complicated, he's going to have a lot of people under him. And there we're going to have the great courts, the great court of the south, the great court of the north. There's going to be nomarchs. Each nome, there's 42 nomes, and there were 42 judges in the trial of the underworld, right? There were 42 judges that represented the 42 basically districts or 42 sections of the Nile that Egypt governed over and taxed, right? I always got to throw that in there. And so the instructions to the vizier, to the local nomarchs, and how they're to decide cases are to be very precise. And then there were also local courts. But what would those laws be if we don't have a particular code? So that would relate to what we call in America the common law. Right? We're talking about codified law versus what we in the West would call common law. The common law, contract, torts, property, and what have you, they are not codified. They have there's a process of codifying them. The United Commercial Codes and the restatements and other legal authority and writings that you'll learn all about in law school, or if you practice law, about the authorities. And they're trying to regularize and corral all the rules, and so that people will have notice of them. So lawyers, law students, judges will have note of what the law has been through this common law cycle where individuals come before court, and instead of referring to a code that's passed by a legislature or a king, basically arguing their case within the principles that judges understand. Right? Common law is judge-made law, right? It's judge-made law, whereas a code of law is made by a legislature and perhaps even or the king or queen. So this common law in Egypt is ubiquitous, and it's governed by Mot. So we know that there are principles by which the judges will make disputes. There is morals, there are norms. It's very clear about this. So let's say, and specifically, let's talk even about the trial that gets you into the netherworld or gets you to join back with Osiris in the netherworld. I have to pass through a trial where my heart or my ka is measured against the feather of Mot. Right, just a feather. My heart has to be light as a feather. I can't have any guilt upon it. And in order to establish that, I have to recite before the gods the 42 negative confessions. Among them, there are 7 that we can consider laws. I have not robbed with violence. I have not done violence to any man. I have not committed theft. I have not slain man or woman. I have not uttered falsehood. I have attacked no man. I have not set my mouth in motion against any man. I have not defiled the wife of a man. Okay, so I haven't robbed, stolen, beaten, assault and battery, theft or larceny, murder, lying, especially lying, and have not set my mouth in motion against a man. That's also defamation and slander. So not just fraud and lying, but also defamation and slander. And I have not attacked no man. I have not defiled the wife of a man. We'll see later that that can be split into two: rape and adultery. Right, that rape had its own punishment as far as castration and death and what have you, while adultery also was punished in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was a very conservative society. We'll talk about that more specifically. So there we have a source, the negative confessions. We have a source for law that can be used in a court system, a small court, grand court, or whatever, that can deal with disputes between people when it comes to property, when it comes to physical violence or what have you, that these negative confessions, these principles of Mott, can definitely serve as a basis for decisions, for deciding who is right, who is wrong, who should be punished, and who should be absolved. More than that, we have further along, as our kings in Egypt, especially New Kingdom, Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, we believe that they still were limited in power, not just by the religious personnel or the church, but also by the council of state, right? That these folks had to say that the king was not a god. Well, then we get to the New Kingdom, the 19th dynasty. Akhenaten tried to become a living god in the 18th, and he was run out. In the 19th, we have at least Horemheb was a former vizier who saw things fall apart and picked them back up and brought them back together through the military and through establishing an autocratic order. So when we talk about autocracy, due process and equal protection is threatened by autocracy. However, we can at least see that he used this autocratic method to try and reinstitute law and order, and more specifically, law and order amongst government officials. So on top of this negative confessions that each individual had, Horemheb comes and issues an edict for enhanced penalties, very harsh penalties for government officials that violate the law, right? We talked about the tale of the eloquent peasant, the teachings of Ptah-hotep. Both of them focus very much so on what disorder can occur when the judges of the realm are improper, when they are bribed, when they're corrupt. Diodorus says, Diodorus Siculus, in their administration of justice, the Egyptians also showed no merely casual interest, holding that the decisions of the courts exercise the greatest influence upon community life, and this is in each of their two aspects. For it was evident to them that if the offenders against the law should be punished and the injured party should be afforded succor, there would be an ideal correction of wrongdoing. But if, on the other hand, the fear which wrongdoers have of the judgments of the court should be brought to naught by bribery or favor, they saw that the breakup of community life would follow. Consequently, by appointing the best men from the most important cities as judges over the whole land, that's the Great Court of the South and the Great Courts of the North, but it was Great Court of the South first, they did not fall short of the end which they had in mind. It's very impressive. There's even more. Let's talk about this edict of Horemheb. What did it say? More specifically, let's take a piece of it. I have improved this entire land. I have sailed it as far as the south of the wall. I have learned its whole interior. I have traveled entirely in its midst. I have searched in, and I've sought two officials. Two. We're talking about again. Horemheb is the 19th dynasty. He's after Hatshepsut. He's after He's after Ramses II. So we have an empire stretching from Greece to Ethiopia and possibly even Kenya. And so we're splitting, Horemheb's going to split this between the two in order to have law and order in both. And I've sought two officials perfect in speech, excellent in good qualities, knowing how to judge the innermost heart, hearing the words of the palace, the laws of the judgment hall. Again, note that this person is not from the greatest families, right? That he's perfect in speech, excellent in good qualities, knowing how to judge, right? Meritocracy. I have appointed them to judge the two lands, to satisfy those who are in it. I've given to each one his seat. I have set them in the two great cities of the south and the north. The south being Thebes, the north either being Memphis or Avaris. Every land among them cometh to him without exception. Every land, right? Every province, right? This is at a point where, again, they're in control of Lebanon, in control of Syria, and possibly even Turkey and Greece, and then all the way down to Kenya in the south. I've put every land them cometh to him without exception. I've put before them regulations in the daily register of the palace. Let me say that again. I've put them before them regulations in the daily register of the palace. I have directed them to the way of life. I've led them to the truth. I teach them, saying, do not associate with others of the people. Do not receive the reward of another, not hearing. How then shall those like you judge others, while there is one among you committing a crime against justice? Woo-wee. Independent judiciary. Did you see the part about them not getting paid? You see the part about them not taking bribes or whatever? I teach them, do not associate with others of the people, do not receive the reward of another, not hearing, right? How then shall those like you judge others, while there is one among you committing a crime against justice? If even one of you is corrupt, it demeans the whole practice. Again, this is 1500 BC, right? 1500, 2000 is 2,000 years before the Christian era. Now, as to the obligation of silver and gold, my majesty remits it in order that there not be collected an obligation of anything from the official staff of the north, south and the north. Don't take people's stuff. One of the problems with government officials, especially when you're out in the army collecting taxes, is all that tax money going back to the government? I know you said that it's going back to the government, but it's so easy for a tax collector to pierce off some for themselves. And even if the person knows that I only owe a tenth, that they make up their own taxes. And that type of corruption leads to the devolution of the state, because then people from these foreign lands don't want to pay taxes anymore. They try to find other people to protect them from you in order to not pay taxes, and that causes the armies to have to fight more expensive. Controlling an empire of that size becomes literally impossible if the officials are corrupt. Now, as for any official or any priest concerning whom it shall be heard saying, he sits to execute judgment among the official staff appointed for judgment, and he commits a crime against justice therein, it shall be against him a capital crime. Behold, my majesty has said so. Public corruption can be punishable by death. There was a death penalty, and we'll talk about Bianchi abolishing the death penalty, but yes, there was a death penalty. That may not be surprising, because you might think of all ancient societies dealing with crime through death. But that wasn't the case in ancient Egypt. It is believed by most that when it comes to the death penalty, it was less often imposed in Egypt than anywhere else at the time. And as a matter of fact, it was usually a reserved prerogative of the pharaoh. That you could not kill a citizen of Egypt just by the directive of a local nomarch or mayor or provincial governor. Perhaps a beating or taking their property, yes, but to have them killed, no. So the list of known offenses that we were dealing with in the Old Middle Kingdom is, we shall, however, theft and extortion, sexual misconduct, basically rape or adultery, assault, slander and defamation of character, disturbing the dead. Now, we're going to talk about the tomb raiders raiding pyramids, because I think there's a misconception about now, it is a crime. Let me not confuse anybody. Raiding tombs is theft. Disturbing the dead is a crime in ancient Egypt. However, it's a very interesting dynamic that we think of just common grave robbers trying to get rich, and I'm sure there were, but it also seems that the Temple of Amun in the south was also involved in grave robbing the north, trying to get the pharaohs out of Giza because the north or lower Egypt had been lost, and that we wanted to bring the culture back to the south. Anyway, okay, judicial misconduct we just spoke about, murder, conspiracy, and treason. All of these things we know to be crimes in the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. So those are notice of the charges that I might find myself accused of. What about my opportunity to be heard? Again, I think it's amazing that we see the very first description of a hearing in the teachings of Ptah-hotep that we talked about 3 or 4 episodes ago, that although all that the petitioner asked for cannot be granted, a fair hearing soothes the heart. Right? And basically telling judges, let people say what they have to say. Let them get it all out. Allow them to testify and complete the testimony. We also know that from the tale of the eloquent peasant that we're going to record this testimony, and that record, we're going to create a record that other judges could decide from. You're not going to testify personally in front of the pharaoh, even if you have a right to appeal. Yes, your words will be recorded and then sent up the chain for a decision to hold on to the original decision or to reverse it. So we have this idea of a record, which is absolutely amazing. And when we get to the Harem conspiracy, I actually have it. So I'm going to even give to you what the record of the Harem conspiracy, the actual record. We're going to talk about it. We have an appeals process. We have professional judges in the Middle Kingdom. In the Old Kingdom, it's more likely to be hereditary, right? The Old Kingdom, mostly it's people within the family that are going to decide, especially local decisions, that the mayors and governors of towns are also related to the wealthiest families. And so they're going to act as the judges. The pharaoh and the vizier are going to hear cases personally during those times. But as the Middle Kingdom comes in, the population grows, right? Because again, imagine the Sphinx and the pyramids and them gleaming in gold and silver and copper and just shining everywhere as 50-story buildings that can be seen for hundreds and hundreds of miles. It attracts more and more people. So Middle Kingdom Egypt is much larger. New Kingdom Egypt is much larger than that. So even though its administration seems to be purist when it's small, that tends to be how things go. But there's this scribe class. Now that we've had this Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt have all this papyrus, they have all this government bureaucracy. They have the first state known to man where ruling over several provinces is necessary through taxation. We have this class of scribes that are now being developed through education by learning how the divine language, as it's called, hieroglyphics, and other script, right, to describe so that the government can function. And we goes from hereditary to more competitive, where yes, you have to be kind of wealthy, yes, you got to be kind of a noble family, but this search for those who are intelligent and to elevate them in higher and higher positions really come to fruition in the Middle Kingdom. By the time we get to the New Kingdom, Hatshepsut, her chief advisor is an Asian man who might even be a woman. And so we go to an early state, Old Kingdom, to an intermediate state in the Middle Kingdom, to an advanced state or more meritocratic state in the New Kingdom. We know that there's a federal hierarchy, that they're not just a confederation of towns and provinces that have equal rights among them. Well, they may have among them, but we know that the pharaoh, the king of Thebes, and the dynasty has a greater authority than all of them. We know that again through the tale of the eloquent peasant, where the pharaoh wants to hear Kunanup's speech, and he has to hold him over, so he can't allow. He tells Nemtenach and those others that are going to hear the case to keep Kunanup in the city, but because he's going to be there, he knows he's not wealthy person, and that his family would suffer without the food and the provisions that he's supposed to bring back. So he can't be in two places at once. And so the Pharaoh orders the appellate judge, the nomarch, and all the way down to Kunanup's town to find provisions for his family. And once the Pharaoh says it, that's what goes down. Right, and it goes through a chain of command. So there is not this, oh, I request this, do me this favor. No, this is my order, have it followed all the way down to the chain of command. There was also this idea of an appeal. I'm not sure which I think this is a Middle or New Kingdom quote. I have to look it up further, but the quote is very interesting because this definitely gives you the impression of an appeals process that you can win. And we don't know how much wealth is concerned here, but the person whose tomb this comes from claims that they even got the vizier fired. Right? That the judgment of the vizier was so bad and his appeal to the Pharaoh was so good that he basically had the Pharaoh and those under him fired. Charge concerning his running after the chief workman Neferhotep, my brother, although it was he who reared him. And he closed his doors before him, and he took a stone and broke his doors. So let me say, so what are we talking about here? I'm sorry. And they caused men to watch Neferhotep because he said, I will kill him in the night. And he beat 9 men in that night. And the chief workman Neferhotep brought a claim against him before the vizier Amunmos, and he inflicted a punishment upon him. So we have here a chief workman, Neferhotep, my brother, who has a beef with someone else. And that person is threatening him, and after he closes the door, and he took a stone and broke his door. So after I close my door, I'm the chief workman, I run a shop, right? And one of the workers or somebody is disgruntled, and they're coming after me, right? And they take a stone to my door even at night, right? Throwing rocks at my house. And they cause men to watch Neferhotep. So now people even have to watch me to make sure that you don't come kill me. And he beat 9 men in that night. So even though people are watching me, this one dude, or maybe a gang of dudes, but it seems like this one dude is causing major problems. And if there's a problem, again, with the person who's trying to run the workshop or whatever we're trying to produce, then that becomes a problem for the state. And the chief workman Neferhotep brought a claim against him before the vizier Amunmos, and he inflicted a punishment upon him. Now here we seem to be inflicting a punishment on Neferhotep. It was argued that in order to, that not only were, this is going to sound interesting, weird, not only were criminal suspects beaten to extract perhaps a confession to see if they were lying, there's also evidence or the suggestion that just your common witness might just be beaten just to make sure you're telling the truth. You have to endure this pain in order for us to think you're seriously coming in here telling the truth, because it's too easy to just come into court and lie on people. So are you willing to endure this pain to then tell on someone else? Well, after this goes upon, he brought a complaint against the vizier before Mos, or Amunmos, the pharaoh, and he had him dismissed from the office of the vizier, saying he chastised me. Again, it's not the clearest quote in the world, but it definitely shows this opportunity to appeal a judgment, win that judgment, and even bring sanctions upon the decision maker or the judge or the vizier that rendered it. So from here, let's talk about a specific case. Let's talk about the Harem conspiracy, a situation, an actual court case from the late New Kingdom where the pharaoh has been an attempt on his life, right? A murder trial. And not only any murder trial, because there were others, not just any murder trial, but a murder trial of a conspiracy between God's wife of Ammon right? Basically, the Pope-S, the highest religious figure in the country, or especially Upper Egypt, especially to those in Nubia, the one whom authority is established such that we pay our taxes. The woman who is supposed to be the successor to Queen Nefertari in the statues of Abu Simbel. Combines or conspires with several officials, including the captain of the Nubian archers, the Medjay warriors that we mentioned all the way back in the beginning, to assassinate the pharaoh and return Egypt to its southern roots in the religion or the Church of Amun. Where's my here we go. The Harem conspiracy against Ramesses III. So we're talking about the 20th dynasty. We're talking about the 20th dynasty. We're talking about God's wife T and her daughter TT, right? And all we got to do is institute the word Nefer for Neferti or Nefertiti. These are second T's and TT's, right? The first T, the first TT, Tua, Toya, Tay, these queen mothers, these God's wives were earlier in the 18th dynasty and also the 19th dynasty. Here we're talking about the 20th dynasty, where things are starting to fall apart, where the North, the Asians and Europeans, the Hittites, the Greeks, the Libyans, all up in the northern delta are starting to assert power amongst themselves and either not pay taxes to the state or at least not respect of the southern half and take the taxes from those areas and exploit it for themselves. Okay, so T and TT attempt to overthrow the Northern Delta government and return Egypt's governance to the south, and apparently both were killed. What happens is Ramses III marries another woman, right? Now there's lots of different wives, so that's not salacious in itself. But these other wives, and this is an important part about matrilineal property succession, they have their children, the children of those wives that come from Asiatic places, the Hittites, right? This is with political marriages, Assyrians, Persians. We will connect as people, we will connect as countries. If you send me one of your princesses to become my wife, then we will, look upon you favorably as part of our kingdom. And note that we're not sending any wives out to them. We're send me your women, but none of our women can go out there, right? Wait till one of our women asks for a Hittite prince comes. All hell breaks loose. So marriage, women, all these things had very political consequences. Why? Because of the children. If I can bring in I bring in a Hittite princess or a Persian princess as a wife. We bear a child who's half Egyptian, half Persian. And then if I can control Persia, if I control or influence the Hittites or the Canaanites, then hopefully I can force them to have elections, right? That's a thing we used to do, is to push them to have elections. You'll see that going on nowadays in current times. And then install, with our wealth, install that prince or princess that grew up, especially that grew up in Egypt, right? So I'm going to bring princes and princesses from other places. I'm going to educate them in the Egyptian way. And then when there's opportunities, I'm going to install them as the head of governments, as friendly heads of governments in other places, right? That's how this empire is going to spread. And because they've been trained in the Ammonite religion, that's how Amun spreads also throughout the entire empire from Greece to Ethiopia. And the ruler in Egypt, however, stays conservative as long as the new king, the new pharaoh, comes from a queen mother, right? So yeah, have your fun with these princesses, and we'll install those offspring into foreign governments. But as for Egypt itself, the matrilineal property succession rules say, no, this person, the next ruler, has to be from a Egyptian woman, right? One of the queen mothers, or her daughters, and perhaps she could adopt one of the daughters. That used to be a legal device that the kings and queens used to do, would be adopt certain persons so that the people would then accept them later, right? as the new queen mother or the new king or the new queen. But in this case, Ramses the third marries a woman named Iset. And this is a little more serious than just a woman who's going to, just a princess whose offspring is going to then rule a foreign land. No, this woman is now installed by Ramses III as the god's wife of Amun. So she's not, doesn't seem as though she is Egyptian by nature, but then she is installed named Isis Tahejmet. And becomes the queen mother, God's wife, for not just herself, for the next several pharaohs, pharaohs 4, 5th, 6th. They're all her sons and grandsons. So the interesting thing is, look at that. We follow the matrilineal power succession after she's installed, but there's still a beef that she is foreign, or those emperors are foreign, and they're residing and their power is centralized in the north, and that they're subjecting now Upper Thebes or Upper Egypt and Nubia, not as part of, not as the head of the kingdom, but as being a tributary piece. Her daughter, Isis II, she's the queen mother during Ramses the 7th, 8th, 9th reign. And she holds down the title of God's wife in the north for a while. So all this is going down in the north. And I bring those up to show you that even though this conspiracy, this harem conspiracy, may have killed Ramses III, they were not successful in returning the government back down to Thebes. So even though we have this great action taken by TT and the commander of the Nubian armies, the Medjay warriors, it doesn't seem like they were successful. They at least extracted the south out, right? So the 21st, 2nd, and 23rd dynasties, they're split between the south and the north. And so the 25th dynasty, Pianki, as we know, when you talk about the rule of the Nubian pharaohs, comes all the way up from Napata and conquers Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, and returns them to the fold for at least another 50. Oh, and also, again, the Asiatic provinces for another 50 years, holds it down, brings us back to what Mat and how the old order was, but it doesn't last. And after Pianki and the Nubian dynasty, the 26th, 27th, 8th, we have more Assyrian, Persian, Greek, and then Roman. So going back to this harem conspiracy against Ramses III, whether Isis is installed after T, or they're killed, or whether she's before, and that's the reason we have a conspiracy, is unknown at this time, or at least I don't know at this time. It could have happened either way. Like that after the conspiracy, she's T and TT are killed, and then we have the marriage of Ramses III and Iset, who becomes Isis. Or it makes more sense to me that T was put to the side, Ramses marries Iset, right, and establishes her as God's wife, and that angers not just T and TT, but again, all of the South. That's what makes sense to me, that all of the South, the Church of Amun, everyone is in an uproar that this queen mother has been appointed from an Asiatic princess, from an Asiatic province. So they attempt to kill the king, whether the king died directly from their assassination attempts is not clear, but he does not survive past the trial. So I think it's fair to say that they did, in fact, go through with their execution, but they are caught. So let's first talk about the jury that they impaneled, because the papyrus describes just about everybody who has been impaneled to be a jury member over this trial. Notably includes the butler. First of all, the butler, right? We have a list of people who are impaneled to be jurors over this trial, and many of them are of extremely high rank, but then others of them just seem to be just kind of a middling rank. The butler, Maharbal. right? That's an Asiatic name, right? In service of Baal, that's an Asiatic god. So that this person is allowed to serve on a jury is interesting slash extraordinary. So when we talk about equal protection of law, the idea that foreigners, even as concerned as Egyptians were about so-called Asiatics, that here we have Maharbal is impaneled on the jury. Now, on the other hand, you could look at and argue that this was evidence of why there was a conspiracy to begin with. And you could also argue that the conspirators were simply, they were wrong, right? You could make the argument that even though the power base is leaving the South, that they should have respected integration as far as an equal protection concern is. We don't know enough of the facts there, but we do know that there was a conspiracy. We do know that there is a jury, there is a record. There included on there is the butler Maharbal, which is an Asiatic name. We also know that this jury is to be judge, jury, and executioner. He was placed before the great nobles of the court of examination. They examined his crimes. They found him guilty. They brought his punishment upon him. Right? Judge, jury, and executioner. This jury is going to compile a record. Right? Not that the pharaoh is going to make the initial decision. The pharaoh is going to review this, or at least the vizier or somebody is reviewing this decision that has to be put on record. As for this is written in the papyrus. As for the words which people have spoken, I know them not. Go ye and examine them. Right? That's the words of the pharaoh. Right? Now, it could be form, right? We're talking about form letters, reform papers and whatnot, boilerplate language. Yet it's still impressive that it needs to be in there. As for the words which people have spoken, I know them not. Go ye and examine them. Right? Bring me, compile a record. Okay, well, now we're compiling the record. Let's talk about notice. The charges. The charges that were listed for all of these conspirators, and there was over 30 of them. Collusion with Queen T and the women of the harem. Again, the harem is not a sexual place. It's a convent. It's for the Church of Ammon, the god's wife of Ammon, T, and the women of the harem, which also, again, leads me to believe that they are offended. They are seriously offended that that Ramesses III believes he has the authority to install a foreign princess as the god's wife of Ammon. The crime of the harem, insurrection. The great criminal Pebekamen, formerly chief of the chamber, he was brought in because of his collusion with T and the women of the harem. He made common cause with them and began bringing out their words to their mothers and their brothers who were there, saying, stir up the people, incite enemies to hostility against their lord. It was a very specific charge. Very specific charge. Bring out their words to their mothers and their brothers. Matrilineality, who were there, saying, stir up the people, incite enemies to hostility against their lord. The great criminal Petoetaman, formerly inspector of the harem, in the suite, he was brought in because of his hearing the words which the people discussed with the women of the harem without reporting them. Let me say that again. He was brought in because of his hearing the words which the people discussed with the women of the harem without reporting them. So here we have the declaration or the insistence that hearing of a crime, not even participating, knowing that a crime is taking place and not reporting is a crime in itself in Egypt, right? That's how deep we're going to be with this law. Okay, so the accused were Queen T, the great criminal Bimenwis, formerly captain of the archers in Nubia. He was brought in because of the letter which his sister, who was in the harem, had written to him, saying, incite the people to hostility, and come thou to begin hostility against thy lord. This is a revolution, right? This is the idea of the South rising up. This is the idea of Thebes and Nubia rising up against the power of the dynasty in the north. And again, when we talk about tomb raiders, The North thinks that the South thinks the North is sold out. The South thinks that Lower Egypt has gone Asiatic, has gone Mediterranean, is not following the principles of Mott, is not committed to the olden ways, and not only are in this case inciting hostility, we'll talk about another case where they are involved in tomb raiding, trying to bring the artifacts and whatnot out of the North down to the South. The great criminal also amongst the accused are the great criminal Paez, formerly commander of the army. Numerous officials of the harem, inspectors, scribes, the great criminal, the Libyan, Yaneni, former butler. Wives of the people of the harem gate, who united with the men when things were discussed, who were placed before the nobles of the court of examination. They found them guilty. They brought their punishment upon them. 6 women. Okay, so women here are being tried in their own person, in their own individual, as their own individuals, not as members of a family or whatnot, but being judgment brought upon them and punishments brought to them upon individuals with no distinction between men and women at the time, or in this particular case. The great criminal Pere, son of Ruma, formerly overseer of the White House. The big house. I'm just showing, I want to name these names just to show you how deep this is, because we're going to talk later about how under African tradition, the Queen Mother, the Council of the State can have the king kill himself, can impeach the king if they're dissatisfied with his rule. And something is suggesting with the grandness of these people who are accused that that's what happened. That these were members of a council of state, amongst others, in Upper Egypt that conspired with T and TT to kill Ramesses III, and they were all brought to court and sentenced and basically killed. The great persons brought in because of their crimes and because of their collusion with Pebekamen, Paez, and Petaware. They were placed before the nobles of the court of examination in order to examine them. They found them guilty. They left them in their own hands in the court of examination. They took their own lives, and no punishment was executed upon them. Why would they take their own lives? Well, because the traditional means of the death penalty in Egypt was impalement. So you could either be killed by the state. In other words, they're going to take a big stake, a pointed stake, and stick it up your ass and put you up on this pole and let you then fall down on this pike and die excruciatingly painful and publicly, right? This idea of impalement was the punishment exacted by the state. There's also a discussion of there are also penalties talking about killing people by throwing to the crocodiles, throwing them in the lake and the rivers and stuff. But others are allowed to perhaps kill themselves. Perhaps there was a potion. Perhaps there was a non-painful way to do it. I'm not certain. But they took their own lives and no punishment was executed upon them. Corrupted judges, apparently, several people that were impaneled to be judges and jury in this case were punished. That apparently some of the accused got to them, talked to them, tried to influence their decision, and they were discovered, right? And that those members of the jury impaneled, or the judges, were actually criminally charged. Persons upon whom punishment was executed by cutting off their noses and ears because of their forsaking the good testimony delivered to them. This great criminal Pebes, former butler, this punishment was executed upon him. He was left alone. He took his own life. The great criminal Mai, formerly scribe of the archives. The great criminal Tenakte, formerly officer of the infantry. The great criminal Onane, formerly captain of the police. Again, is probably a Nubian. And the Harem conspiracy, at least the tablet thereof, speaks of one person who was acquitted. The person who had been connected with them, they had contended with him with evil and violent words. He was dismissed. Punishment was not executed upon him. The great criminal Hori, who was standard bearer of the infantry. So first of all, he's still called the great criminal. So maybe great criminal means suspect, or we don't know. We believe, or scholars believe, that you were guilty until proven innocent. So if you were brought to trial, you had to explain why you didn't do it versus the state showing why you did. And even those that were let off, that were exonerated, seemed to still have this moniker of the great criminal Hori who was standing bearer of the injury. But why did he get let off? Let's talk about this. It was said that if you know of a crime and you don't report it, that you are also guilty. Now, this one, I don't think Hori is dealing. Hori is one of the jury members. He's one of the police force that is perhaps holding the suspects down while the trial is going on. And it says, person who had been connected with them, they had contended with him with evil and violent words. He was dismissed. Punishment was not executed. In other words, it sounds like they threatened him. That his excuse was that I protested, I wasn't down with them, and not only was I not down with them, they threatened to kill me. We argued, yelled, and there's people that know that there's clear proof and evidence that I was not down with the cause. And that person was, in fact, by the text, exonerated from the crime. So this is a very interesting example of a report of a crime and how a legal process was implemented for those that attempted to kill the king, or in fact did kill the king. Where you might imagine that if the king is killed, that whoever did it, we just gonna roll on you with lightning and thunder and just take you out. The fact that we had to follow a due process of law, or at least to be perceived by the people of murdering the king, really tells you how intense and expected legal decisions were. Legal architecture was had developed to be in the old, middle, and then the new kingdom, right? That we had a trial of conspirators, and at least one of them got off. Wow. So let's talk about these penalties for other crimes and whatnot. So we know death. We just heard about cutting off ears, cutting off noses. There was also exile. There's several instances where people were threatened with being exiled, on the one hand to Asian provinces, on the other hand to the Western or Eastern Desert, or to Nubia. So it's very interesting to see what is considered a punishment when it comes to exile. Especially, well, let me just leave that at that. So exile being a punishment, cutting off ears and noses, property penalties. So if you were to be convicted of stealing someone's goods, you could be ordered to return it in 10 times as much. That if you were a government official who stole, you could be not only killed, but your family could be subject to paying over to the victim 100 times what you had taken. Maybe that's hyperbolic. Maybe that's an exaggeration that they're trying to use to impress people and really get them to not do it. But regardless, this idea of concern for justice is very strong and ubiquitous. Whippings, beatings, opening wounds. So again, we're talking about a legal society. We're not talking about a soft one. These are very, very harsh penalties that seem to be inflicted on people. And then let's talk about this one specific crime, castration for rape. If you were guilty of raping a married woman, and I know that's problematic, right? A married woman. So what are we talking about when it comes to other women or other non-free women or whatnot? Is this applying to everybody? Does everybody have these rights? Not sure. But we do know that certain women had rights, or married women had to be rights of not being lessened. This comes from Diodorus, and Diodorus is very late, right? So we're talking New Kingdom and after. Severe also were their laws touching women, for if a man had violated a free married woman, they stipulated that he be emasculated, castrated, considering that such a person by a single unlawful act had been guilty of 3 greatest crimes: assault, abduction, and confusion of offspring. 3 separate crimes: assault, abduction, and confusion of offspring. So ingrained was this idea of family and the power succession going in a certain order that if you confuse the offspring up, that's when a patrilineal cycle actually falls apart. And that's why a matrilineal system is such indoors often, and especially is very culturally conservative. Why? Mama's baby, papa's maybe. But if a man committed adultery with the woman's consent, the laws ordered that the man should receive 1,000 blows with the rod, and that the woman should have her nose cut off, on the ground that a woman who tricks herself out with an eye to forbidden license should be deprived of that which contributes most to a woman's comeliness. Okay, so we have two different penalties based on when there's adultery. The man gets 1,000 blows with the rod, and a woman has her nose cut off. Neither is pleasant, but I'm definitely taking the 1,000 blows with the rod before I'm having my nose cut off. So we're going to say that this is not consistent with equal protection. This is not consistent with, I don't believe it's consistent with Mott in that respect. But again, these penalties and these issues of justice is we're just trying to show you how legally intense the ancient world was when it comes to law, economics, trade, etc. And now with due process, equal protection, blah, blah, blah. We also know that later, Pianki, the Nubian, is mentioned by the Greeks as the first pharaoh to prohibit the death penalty. It is supposedly executed rarely to begin with, especially if you compare it to Asians and Europeans. And they even have some writings on it from the teachings of Merikare, a Middle Eastern literature. So on top of the teachings of Ptahhotep, on top of the Tale of the Eloquent Peasant, we have another text that's used to describe good judging or jurisprudence, right? Beware of punishing unjustly. Do not kill, for it will not benefit you. Punish by means of flogging and imprisonment, for thus the land will be kept in good order, except for the rebel who has contrived his plots. But God is aware of the rebel, and the God will smite his evil with blood, but the merciful man will prolong the length of his days. Do not execute a man of whose abilities you are aware, one with whom you were educated. Do not slay even one man who is close to you, for you have favored him, and God knows him. He is one of those who prosper on earth, for those who serve the king are as gods. Implant love for yourself in the entire land, for a good disposition means being remembered, even after years are past and gone. Be a merciful judge. Mercy. These are your people. You are not different from them just because you've been relieved of paying taxes and being supported by the state. Just because you got one of them fancy wigs and all types of stuff, right? That goes all the way back to these times, right? Those English wigs and whatnot, trying to look like the pharaoh. You are still one of the people. And so issuing the death penalty, not a good thing. Punished by means of flogging and imprisonment. Again, this idea that Africa did not have prisons, I think is probably a factually correct statement, but I don't know that it is part of that is part of Mott, because we have imprisonment in Egypt when we have this intense amount of wealth. We don't have imprisonment in many other places in Africa, but I'm not so sure that we have systems that are designed that have the resources to have a building with guards that are paid and to house people and basically warehouse people, right? Not only do I think it's morally problematic to African people, I think it's financially, economically problematic to spend all that time and resources to basically warehouse people. All right, so we had all these different types of crimes. We have tomb raiding, murder, adultery, rapes, theft, stealing, even sort of kind of a tort type of thing with Kananook trampling over trespassing on Nemtanok's property and trampling over his good, trespass to chattel and what have you. So we have all these different hearings and legal proceedings to decide whether someone is guilty of a tort or a crime, however you want to describe it. We also have these issues of kind of a public affair, right? These are private, where a crime, something went wrong, and it's listed as crime, but as a lawyer, I know that this is an administrative hearing. This is an administrative hearing about tomb raiders. This is from what's called the Abbot Papyrus Puero. And what's happening is tombs were one mayor of the eastern mayor of Thebes and the western mayor of Thebes are mad at each other. And again, this is one of the later dynasties, and again, when the south and the north are at odds with each other, the south is continuing the African interior, the pre-dynastic period, holding on to the old traditions. The north is only doing so in name only, as pretext, and just basically using the south as a tributary state. The south is, and part of what's going on is the gods of Ammon, the church of Ammon, the gods' wives of Ammon. They don't feel as though the pharaoh, the king, the government is pious enough. They don't think that they're respecting their religion, and that the artifacts that are in the tombs belong to the south, not the north. Yes, they may be up north, even as far as Giza, because that's how far folks had come to build those edifices and extend the power of Egypt. But now that it's being contested, it would seem that the tomb raiders are also sometimes priests, also officials. So here we have one official accusing the other official of allowing the tombs to be raided. Why would they allow the tombs to be raided? Because it's just what we just talked about, that one of the mayors is probably considers themselves as an Upper Thebes person, an Upper Egyptian, or even perhaps Nubian, while the other believes themselves more loyal to the crown that has now been established in the Mediterranean Delta. Here it says, according to the Abbot Papyrus Puero, was the mayor of Western Thebes and the chief of police, usually a Nubian, of the Theban necropolis under Ramesses IX during such a period, the 9th. So we're now 6 generations of Ramesses after the Harem conspiracy. So we know that things are even worse off now. Passer, the mayor of Eastern Thebes, accused him of neglecting his duty. So Passer accuses the chief of police, which is typically a Nubian, over Western Thebes, of neglecting his duties, allowing the tombs to be raided so those pieces can be brought down further south. That's my interpretation. During these investigations that followed, a number of tomb robbers were apprehended, but Puero remained in office and the robberies continued. So number one, that seems to suggest that he didn't do it. But if you actually look at the papyrus, it's a very interesting administrative report. Right? They send inspectors to the necropolis, and they go through each temple and they report upon it in a very, very precise document saying, we went through this temple, the doors were not broken. We went through this temple, the doors were were still unsealed. We went to this temple, nothing was taken here. However, there was one temple out of, I think, the 10 where things were removed. So in total, through this administrative hearing, they determined that the I'm going to use some Western terms here or American terms here, that the chief of police was not acting arbitrarily or capriciously, that he did follow his orders, and that the determination against him would not stand. We have more examples there's lots of other examples of court cases. There's a lot of excitement about they found a settlement called Deir el Medina, basically a work camp. If we're going to build a temple or build a pyramid, there's going to be thousands of people that are going to live there. Or think about that expedition that sent 9,000 men to go mining. They're going to create a town. They're going to create a town because it's going to take years to build this thing. And folks are going to have to live together. And there's going to be disputes. And someone's going to have to hear the disputes. And there's going to be a court for this town. And the interesting thing is, amongst the accusations, there is one where a woman is accused of being a thief. She swears on whatever religious text so that I didn't do it and you can beat me or do whatever you want to me if I do. Upon that testimony, the magistrate sends officials to her house. Doesn't say anything about a husband. Doesn't say anything about a father or whatever. Sends officials to her house where they discover the missing goods. Right, so they bring it back. Apparently, she's been holed over in jail until then. They bring it back, and she is in fact found guilty, and then executed. So I guess the lesson for equal protection here is that, again, women are treated as individuals and their own persons for good or for bad. They can sue for their own property, as we have lots of wills and contracts that attest to that, but they also can be accused and guilty of crimes and punished no different than men. Although when we saw that issue of adultery, we did see something of a difference. Now we're at the point, though, where it is devolving. We've exhausted the old, the middle, the new kingdom. We've gotten to the 25th dynasty, and then they have been expelled by the Assyrians, and that's reflected in the records, archaeological and textual. And one of the ways we know that things have really fallen apart and how black folks or Africans are now the being subjugated instead of being the conquerors is through the police force, right? We now see that where the Medjay warriors were, Nubians were the police force and very well respected, and there aren't tales of much corruption at all. There's so many tales about how to act right that we now have in the third intermediate period the idea that the police are in fact subjugating the people, that the police, now controlled by the north, the Delta, are treating the southern citizens as basically tributary peoples or glorified slaves. In the third period, in the intermediate period of Egypt, the police force was still operated, but with little of the efficiency of the new kingdom at its height. The third intermediate period's records are sparse when compared to early areas of Egypt's history, because with the government divided between Tanis and Thebes in the early years and numerous civil wars later, there did not exist the kind of stability and bureaucracy of the periods known as kingdoms. The police force and judicial system were still operating, but exactly how close they were aligned with the earlier understanding of Mot is dubious. There is ample evidence that courts, scribes, judges, and police could be bought. During the 21st dynasty, founded by the monarch Smendes, police corruption by way of taking bribes to look the other way, and even extortion of citizens by officers appears common practice. The famous papyrus of Ani, dating from around this era, offers the following advice: befriend the policeman of your quarter. Do not make him angry with you. Give him food from your house. Do not slight his requests. Say to him, welcome, welcome here. No blame accrues to him who does it. In other words, if you ain't got the police in your pocket, you're asking for trouble, right? So that's the 21st dynasty, where Egypt is starting to really, really lose its greatness. But when it's losing its greatness, it's susceptible to being captured again by Assyria, Persia, Greece, Rome, and everyone else, Arabs after that. So we still don't answer the question. It still doesn't answer the question, which was first, the chicken or the egg? Did the civilization get too grand and fall, and too wealthy, too widespread, and then fall from the graces of Mot and devolve? Or did it grow because of adherence to Mot, and then by not following it, then society begins to fall apart? And I think that's interesting for the future, because again, is it the wealth itself that causes the fall, or is it the inattention to morals, right? Which is more important? Which is between efficiency and wealth and justice, right? Does justice impair wealth, or does justice support wealth? Right? These are some interesting questions that come from this idea of law enforcement that was extraordinary for its time in that area and supported the creation of a state the world had never seen before, and a preeminent state that lasted for over 2,000-3,000 years, controlled by the African South, to its devolution, as it does not follow the principles of Mot, justice, balance, order, truth, etc. we're going to stop here, right? We're almost on 2 hours. We're closing on 2 hours. So we're going to stop here. Again, I appreciate you hanging in there with me. I hope you subscribe to the YouTube channel, Afrolantica.com. I know that points to a website, but if you go to YouTube, we might change that, right? Hopefully, for those that are holding on, maybe we can shorten that to just Afrolantica as the YouTube channel. But until then, Afrolantica.com. Please subscribe. Please ask your friends. And also, if you happen to go to Amazon Kindle and purchase the book Taxes, Death, and Trouble, How Starve the Beast Tax Cut Created the Black Lives Matter Movement. That's my latest book. And I'm very excited today because on top of this lecture, I just found out that the Supreme Court of the United States just found that the 8th Amendment prohibition against excessive fines is incorporated by the 14th Amendment to apply to the states. What does that mean? Taxes, Death, and Trouble is about how Starve the Beast tax cuts, on the one hand, cut wealthy people's taxes, but it replaces it by criminal justice fines and fees levied upon people of color. Right, that when it comes to speeding tickets, truancy fines, that all across the country. Remember Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, just about every black person in there had a warrant because they were charged with some overgrown vegetation or dog barking, and a bunch of tickets were heaped upon them that they can't pay, interest that they can't pay. Then they have a court case that they can't really afford to go to, and if you miss it, you're in the contempt of court. That's another payment. 25 cents per mile added on for the cop to serve your warrant. Probation, if you're convicted, probationary fees, all type, just thousands and thousands of dollars of basically taxes. They have nothing to do with promoting the public safety, and therefore are informal taxes, because as they cut taxes for the wealthy, we have to fund the government some other way, and that other way has been through informal criminal justice fees, forfeitures, surcharges. All these things are informal taxes and ways to switch the incidence of government, the payment of government, from wealthy and white to poor and black. Again, we talk about lots of other things in Taxes, Death, and Trouble, but that is the central theme. And we have some good news today that the Supreme Court unanimously, unanimously held that the Constitution's prohibition on excessive fines does in fact apply to the states and not just the federal government. Now, after that, what the court will accept as excessive will be another thing, and I haven't read the opinion entirely. I will very shortly, probably as soon as we sign off here, and maybe we'll do another podcast or video talking about it. But for now, I appreciate you hanging in here with me, talking about law enforcement in the Nile Valley, due process, equal protection. We're going to continue forward, and since we've almost exhausted our topics with respect to Egypt, we're going to do our next video, bring it back to Nubia, and talking about the Nubian-Egyptian connection and how all these things we've talked about were dispersed throughout Africa, not through Upper Egypt, but through Napata, Meroe, basically the kingdom of Kush, right? Nubia, how that lasts. That if Egypt, the 25th dynasty is around 600 BC, it already exists for 500, 1,000 years prior to that as Kush. There's settlements before that. But then coming through the Christian era to 300, 400, 500 AD. We'll talk about their elections. We'll talk about impeachment. We'll talk about the queen mothers of Nubia and its connection to this Nile Valley scene. So until then, again, better educate ourselves and our children, start and patronize black businesses, stop unduly criticizing each other, accumulate human, social, political, and financial capital. Hotep.